and we are excited to begin a new tradition marking December 5th in the calendar. This is the day that the school was incorporated. So the papers were filed. This is the day that we became effectively a business entity that then allowed us to do what we do, which is educate the finest lawyers in the country and policy minds in the country. And having been doing this for 52 years, all of you know how special this place is. And we're overjoyed to be able to start this tradition with all of you. So a couple of housekeeping. So I'm going to be moderating. We have a wonderful panel today that represent each of the decades of the school's history. I'm going to be stepping back, but I'm going to take a point of moderator privilege and just say that I'm coming to you from proud South Royalton, Vermont. My office is in Deering House. A year ago, I came back. I am in the development office, fulfilling a dream. I'm elated to be at our school, and you'll see my two diplomas behind me and my class banner over here. I think I speak for all of us when I say that I love this place, and I'm so overjoyed at the chance to be able to serve and to do what I do best, which is support our school through fundraising and grant writing. So with that, I'm going to open it up to our panelists. The first question I'm just going to put out there, just as by way of introduction. So each of our panelists are going to just say their name and their class here, where they're dialing in from, and just to get us started to say where they a favored campus spot, whether to study or just to hang out. So I'm going to start with Sam. We're going to work from Sam up to Natasha. So Sam, go ahead.
I'm Sam Slavey, class of 1976. We are the founding class. And I'm speaking to you from Torrington, Connecticut, where I practiced law pretty much since I got out of law school.
All right. So I'm not going to call on that. We're just going to go up through. So
okay. I'm Edna Ball, class of 1983. I got a JD from Vermont Law School. I have retired from practice, and I am relocated to chilly Florida.
Hey, good morning. My name is Tom Leary, class of 98, JD MSEL. I'm dialing in from the north parking lot just outside the Pentagon here in Arlington, Virginia. Just in the interest of, we don't have Zoom on our government computers, and it's hard to get a signal in that big old building. So just came out here for a little fresh air. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that our class hangout probably was Crossroads Bar and Grill, which opened essentially our first year of law school in 1995, and has been a going concern ever since. And we always try to visit Scott Durkee and Crossroads whenever our team is back in town.
I was remiss on not saying where my favorite hangout was at Vermont Law School. It was the library.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Arturo Hernandez. I am class of 2007 JD. I am in St. Louis, Missouri. For those of you who do know me, I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. I have fond memories of VLS. I was there this past summer. It's been about 3-4 years since I've been to South Royalton, and not much has changed, but a lot of things have changed. I will echo Tom's sentiment that from 2004 through 2007, Crossroads Bar and Grill was still a important community location for many of my fellow Swans.
we had we had many hangouts. uh, a lot of them were not at the school. In fact, one of them was the park in South Royalton in nice days. And of course, our first year, when law school first opened, they had a summer session that preceded the beginning of the regular school year. And people in South Royalton knew Anthony Doria better than we did at that time. And and I remember standing in line at the closest thing they have to a supermarket at that time. I don't know what's there now, but there was a nice little market right across from the green. And I remember one of the customers asking about the law school, asked the clerk about the law school, and the clerk said, I think Doria is taking people in who are convicted of something and teaching them about the law. And I thought that was a rather unique answer to what is a law school. But I also remember on I think it was Thursday nights, there'd be a concert in the bandstand in the park, and cars would park around around the park. People would stay in their cars. Every once in a while, a horse and buggy would come in as well. And at the end of a performance, they'd honk their horns. So that's what South Royalton was like when I first got there.
Margot, and then Natasha.
Yes, Sam, that's amazing. I love it. I love hearing so much about where we all got started. So I'm Margot. You get me for the 2010s today. I'm a class of 2013. I am coming to you from the winter wonderland that is Buffalo, New York right now. And I am wildly happy to report that Scott was still running Crossroads from 2010 to 2013, and we would definitely not break behind the bar to plug in our own iPod and turn it into Club Crossroads every single weekend. It was the greatest dance party you have ever seen. So, Natasha, you're after me, babe.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are in the world today. I'm representing the 2020s, I suppose. I'm a graduate of 2024. And right now I'm in Annapolis, Maryland, so staying inside because it's windy as heck out there. I received a JD, and I think my favorite study spot on campus, it would have to be the library. I'm so biased because I also work there for half my time at the school, so definitely the library, although I feel like any spot on campus can truly be a study spot if you're dedicated enough. Yeah.
For what it's worth, I was fond of the second floor of the Chase Center, but also the second floor of the library. I like studying there's a big jade. I think it's still there, a big jade plant. And
yes, the tables with the jade, the shared table space, not a Carol girl. It's always the table.
Yeah, that was I put some good time in those chairs. So it's funny that we're talking about, places. The question I want to ask, and we'll start with Natasha and then go backwards. We can't separate, the school and campus from South Royalton and Vermont. I mean, these are entwined. And so I'm interested in hearing from all of you, how did South Royalton, in all its rural grandeur and beauty and pace and character, how did that shape your experience here and shape your memories of the school? So Natasha.
Oh my goodness. It was quite the shift for me. So I'm originally from South Florida. And so I had to invest in winter jackets for like the first time in my life. It was a lot of firsts for me. Like first time I went sledding, first time I went skiing, a lot of that. So I feel like I really enjoyed it. I fell in love with it. And I kind of developed a system where I would just keep my heavy coat and boots in the carrel. So that way could just sort of chill. I wouldn't have to worry about carrying all that with me all day. But I mention that because, again, from South Florida, so people would see me wearing a t-shirt and, just like long pair of pants. They didn't know I had a winter coat. And so I had several people ask me, like, come up to me, like, do you have a coat? I do have enough funds for one. Like, the people were genuinely worried for me. So I really appreciate that sense of the community as well. Like, people are looking out for one another, especially during the snowstorms and whatnot. But I feel like that really added to the character of not only the school, but the town. Just it was that closeness. Like, for example, when I bought a sled for the first time, I would let anyone use it. Anyone who was passing by, feel free to join in. It was my little study break, so I let anyone join in on that. And I really appreciate that everything was kind of slow paced because I was so used to hearing from my other friends who had gone to different law schools across the country how fast paced everything was, how stressful, they were in cities, there was so much going on. I have ADHD. I would be way too distracted if I was in like an urban environment while studying law. So I really appreciated how everything was slowed down. So that I will say was definitely an adjustment, but I think in a good way, especially when you're in a high stress environment, studying for law, getting a master's, it kind of makes you slow down, appreciate nature. And the colors in fall, I mean, oh my gosh, what can beat that? It's gorgeous. It's like living in a painting every day. And I still think about the fall foliage, just seeing that every day, just gorgeous.
Margo?
So, on the other end of the spectrum, weather-wise, I will give you what a man in Three Penny said to me bar summer when he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What do you like, Earth, the state of Vermont? Like, what do you mean?" And as we kind of peel back the layers, I like opened up and was like, "Oh, I'm from Buffalo." And he just goes, Never mind. You guys are everywhere." So like weather-wise, like I've been going to Vermont since I was a little kid to go skiing at Killington since I was 3. We spend our summers in the Adirondacks. Like I kind of knew what I was getting into. But the rural character, I just love the way that it builds community. You get a random call that's like, "I'm going to the grocery store. Anybody need to go?" And suddenly there's a caravan to go to West Leb. Or like, "Oh, I have snacks in my car." I always had a stack of freezer burritos in my car in the winter because after 7 o'clock, there was nowhere to eat. There really weren't many restaurants and there was absolutely no takeout and nowhere to get anything after dark. So it would be like after 7 o'clock, you'd be like, "Oh, well, if you didn't make it, you're not eating it." So there's always just this little sense of community and people watching out for each other that I think makes me really kind of honed our experience there. So Arturo, going backwards up to you.
Thank you. So, I think like many of us, I grew up, well, not like many of us. I come from South Texas. So I'm born and raised in San Antonio. Went to everybody's favorite undergrad school, Texas A&M, and then decided I wanted to move to Vermont because it's exactly like Texas, and it was exactly what I wanted, what I needed. One of the greatest things I learned, and one of the biggest reasons I chose VLS. One was because I thought I wanted to do environmental law, and then I realized meeting everyone there that I'm passionate, but I'm not that passionate. I don't have the passion some people do. But the best advice I ever got was from a really great friend of mine who actually was my one of my roommates in undergrad for a semester. Is if you want to know how the world works, you need to get out of. He said, get out of Texas, but my advice has always been just get out of wherever you are, whether it's Buffalo, Dallas, South Florida, wherever it is, even VLS, and see how the rest of the world works. It's the only way you're going to learn. And I have to echo with Natasha, the first time seeing the mountains on fire in the fall was absolutely breathtaking, stunning, and amazing. And I'd be remiss if I can't, if I don't mention that the best thing about VLS is that I got to meet my wife there, another VLS alum. And one of the things I learned was I like the rural life. And I've always sort of been passionate about that. But when we left VLS to move to Missouri, I've only been in St. Louis, the big city, for 2 years. Before that, I was in Jefferson City. Before that, I was in Rolla, which are really small, itty bitty towns in Missouri. You know, Jeff City for 15 years, 40,000 people. Living in a large metropolitan area has its perks, but there's a lot of things that I miss about rural living. And that's something that's always going to be with me. Now, I will make real brief mention. Part of that, me and my wife were talking about, maybe in 20, 30 years when we retire, we can just live in a camper and be one of those national forest camp people who live there to give tours and give advice and give things to and help people out when they come to visit the national parks, because we don't see ourselves living in St. Louis in 20, 30 years once the kids are out of the house. That's what I learned from VLS, amongst other things.
Well, for me, picking up on the theme that I came from a small town and in New Jersey, and my whole game plan was to go to Vermont Law School, but then come back to New Jersey and do environmental work there. But as I was reviewing options as to where to go to law school, the in-state options in New Jersey were fundamentally unappealing for a lot of the reasons that I think Natasha mentioned in her comments, just in terms of the pace, how hectic that would all be living in, Camden at Rutgers or Newark. So the contrast that Vermont offered was hard to ignore, both in terms of the standard that the school had set, as well as the environment in which I would have the opportunity to study. And so it was, kind of as I reviewed the bidding on where I was thinking about going to school, it really became a no-brainer that was where I really belonged. And getting up there, everything about my assessment, I think, turned out to be exactly right. For the community reasons that have been alluded to earlier, the fact of the matter is that the dear friends that I made from my class and some of the adjacent classes are lifelong friends, and still people that we love to get together and catch up, whether it's every so often or in the distant kind of 5 and 10 year windows that are attended to reunions. So I think it really is the character of the place that has the tendency to attract people that want to be there, and then that really maximize the opportunity that being in a place that really kind of gets into your soul, like South Royalton does. And so never look back on that decision, with all due respect to the good folks in Rutgers, Newark.
I'm chuckling, Tom, because for several years I worked at Rutgers Law in Newark after I finished at Vermont. But backing up a little bit, I agree with some of what you said. I was waitlisted at another large institution, and I visited Vermont, and I came into town, and I will tell you, I've told other people this story. I drove across the bridge, I drove around the green, and I'm going, where is the law school? And I drove back out. I made a U-turn and came back, and then I saw the sign and, went and did the interview that I was there for. But I think from my perspective, and I agree with some of what Tom said, going to an institution like Vermont was the best choice that I made. I think if I had gone to the other institution that I was waitlisted for, I'm not sure I would have graduated, because Vermont really, because it was small, it was rural, and as people have said, there wasn't much else to do except study. Although we would go to class and talk about, okay, we're going to go out and we're not going to talk about law school. And within 15 minutes of being out of law school, we'd be talking about law school, whether we were at the bar. There was a bar in the basement of the South Royalton house that we hung out at. And we'd be talking about law school. So I think Vermont is the reason, and Larry Olive that I've spoke about earlier are among the reasons that I'm the lawyer that I am now. Retired, but I can't complain of having been there for, the 3 years to attend.
Can I jump in? This is Joel Burkhat, class of 1980. I see, at least he was on a few minutes ago, Scott Cameron, my classmate. And hi, Scott, if you're still there. In any event, I had this dream for years, having grown up in Philadelphia, that where I wanted to live was Vermont. I'd been there on a couple of vacations and really loved it and just thought it was a great place. And when I accepted to Vermont, I was very excited about that. I lived in Vermont, like all of you, for 3 years. Managed to get married and divorced while I was in law school. And and as much as I loved Vermont and I loved the place and I loved Vermont Law School, I realized that having grown up in the city and being a city boy, that there was no way I could live in a rural environment like Vermont. It was too rural. It was too isolated. To go to a decent sized grocery store, you had to drive a half hour. To go to the movies, you had to drive a half hour. To go to anything, you had to drive a half hour at least. And if you wanted some cultural spot like Hanover had, you had to drive to Hanover. So it taught me, as much as I loved Vermont, as much as I was able to use that to propel myself into an environmental law career from day one, thanks to my professors at Vermont Law School. I realized that Vermont for me was a place to visit, but not a place to live. Very different from many of you, I know, but that's how it was for me.
Hi, Joel.
Who's that?
That's Scott.
I'm Sam Slavey.
Hey, Scott.
I'm
Hi, Edna.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
It's okay, Sam. Go ahead.
I'm from the class of 76, again, which was the founding class. And when I was first asked to be on the panel, I said, I'm not sure the class of 76 is representative of the other classes of the 70s. Our experience was very, very unique, including our impressions, at least my impression of South Royalton. I've been a New Englander all my life. I was born and brought up in Torrington, Connecticut. That's where I eventually set up a law practice. And I retired in Torrington, but my education has been throughout New England. I went to schools in Massachusetts. I went to school in Maine. I went to school in Vermont for Vermont Law School. And I thought I knew New England pretty well. I thought I knew Vermont pretty well too, because I've been to Vermont, went up hunting, went up there fishing when I was younger, went there for scout things. And I started canoeing down the Connecticut River my senior year of high school, starting there in Orford, New Hampshire, which is right across the river from Norwich, Vermont. At any rate, when I first came to South Royalton, it was like stepping into another world, and like maybe a century before. It wasn't the same South Royalton in 1973 as it was even in 1976 when we graduated. For one thing, Anthony and Doria owned half the town. It was pretty shabby. It was old. It had been a railroad town at one point, but the railroad station was closed and not used for anything. There were two good places to eat in town. One was the inn, the Royalton Inn, which again was owned by Anthony Doria, and Papagallo's restaurant, which was on the opposite side of the green from the inn, which was also owned by Anthony Doria. And during our initial summer session, it was like a cafeteria. That's where we all went to eat. Our food was part of what we paid, so we went to that for dinner, and every day. But again, the whole atmosphere was much more rural than other places in New England. I grown up on a farm in Connecticut, and I was really surprised at how, I'm not going to say minimal contact a lot of the people there had of the 1970s, with the 1970s. Again, it was quaint. The green was beautiful. A lot of nice things happened on the green. A lot of our conversations, especially in the summer session, happened on the green. And there was a reluctance of the people of South Royalton really to accept this. They were very skeptical of the students because they knew Anthony Doria, and they thought we were a reflection of him. So we weren't welcomed by everybody in the community. They were very skeptical about us. The only building at the law school then was that old school, which I think I told Brock last night. After we were there for a week, one of my classmates demonstrated to us by pulling one of the fire alarms that there was nothing behind the fire alarm. It wasn't connected to anything. And he pulled all the fire alarms in that old school. None of them worked. None were connected. But the South Royalton changed a lot once Anthony Doria exited the scene and Thomas Doublevoice came on the scene. When Thomas Doublevoice came on the scene, and all the other, and of course, all the other trustees who had a lot invested. There were, one thing about Anthony Doria, he was a con man, but he was able to con a lot of these good people to be on the board of trustees, and that was our salvation. Things turned around very rapidly, and again, there was a much different feeling about the town once 1976 came, we graduated, than it was when we first got there. We had our graduation on the green. I don't know if that's still the case or not, if you still hold your graduations, but we actually had a graduation on the green. And Thomas Debevoise had commissioned an anthem for the law school that was played by a string quartet that he hired from New York. I think it was played at our graduation, and it was, and I don't think it was ever played again. I mean, it was a very unusual theme, but the atmosphere is a lot different. Even you could tell in the whole town that things had brightened a little bit. And there's a big change from 73 to 76, but I've talked enough. Let's hear from somebody else.
Well, hey, Sam, this is Scott Cameron. Maybe I could take up from there, because I came to South Royalton in 1976, not as a student, but to visit, and visited with some people. I don't know if you know them. They graduated in 78, Sam, but Stephen Salzman and Frank Burke, and Charlie Quirk. Anyway, and I came up for a visit, and I had a good time, and that ended up being the influencing decision of why I came to Vermont Law School. I don't know how your experience is, or Edna, or yours, or Joel, but I don't think back then that we were consumers of education the way students are consumers now. We didn't have all of the information sources you have. And we certainly didn't go to Vermont Law School because it was the #1 environmental law school. It had no reputation at all. So it was just a fledgling law school. So I ended up going there because I knew some people there, and I met some more people I liked, and I really wanted to live in a rural area. I'm from Long Island, but I'd gone to Colgate University, and I actually stayed up in upstate New York and came over to Vermont Law School, and really liked Vermont. So I started there in 1977 and finished in 1980. I was one of the editors of the newspaper while I was there. And I think it really was a rapidly evolving place, but the community still wasn't totally welcoming. I had, unlike most of the people there, I was married, I had kids. I had kids in school. They had some trouble, at least the fourth grader did, you know, with other kids kind of from town kind of picking on him because he was a law school student. But it really it worked out pretty good because he was a pretty tough kid, and it actually came to some fighting a couple of times, um, over time it got integrated into the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and things like that, and became a good part of the community. When we got there, Joel, remember Chase had just the Chase building, which it wasn't Chase then, it was the library that had just been built. It's now called Chase. And it was a brand new building. There were very limited books there. Of course, we didn't have things like cell phones. We didn't have internet. We didn't have any of those things. So everything was, we had to go look it up in books. And when you had a certain assignment, it was very tough because everybody in your class was getting that book, and there was only one of them. So we sometimes would go to Dartmouth because Dartmouth had a law library.
I spent more time at the Dartmouth Library than I
Yeah,
did in Vermont Law School Library.
and once in a while up to Montpelier too, because it just wasn't always possible. We didn't have any food service there, but one of the things that was really great, and Joel, I'm sure you'll remember this. One of our classmates, Jesse Marshall, was married to a guy named Jim Marshall. They came out here. Jesse was a student. Jim was an incredible chef, and he started a restaurant, which is right on the corner. It's that brick building on the corner as you were walking down towards the law school, towards town, brick building on the left. And it was called the Inn of Court. And he literally started with breakfasts and making bagels. And then when he had enough money, he went to lunches. And then when he had enough money, he went to dinners. And literally, I remember the first dinner he had there. He had 9 plates and plate settings, and a group of 5 came in, and then another group of 5 came in, and they had to wait until he could wash some dishes. But the guy made it into one of the best restaurants in the valley. People would come from by our third year, people were coming from all over for that, and that was a real center of our life and culture. Jim and Jesse ended up going to Washington. He sold it, and I think someone ran it for a while, but I don't think it continued as a restaurant more than a few more years.
Yeah. To continue on with that, Scott, I got there in the fall of '83 and finished both programs by '87. And the place is relatively cosmopolitan now, not just the multiple restaurants that you have there, the world-renowned Worthy Burger, but there's a full-blown fitness center. There is an internal capacity to do food service. From my perspective, the school has really expanded in terms of facilities and a number of categories. But the town is still South Royalton. It's still a small, charming Vermont town, and I love the distinction of being the only law school in the country in a town without a traffic light. So I think while there's an extraordinary intellectual atmosphere that was there right from the start, but it's great to see how the school's reputation and its reach has extended globally at this point.
Yeah. So I want to pivot just in a way, because we've been talking a lot about place, and words I've been hearing is like community and soul, and I feel that I remember, and Tom may know this. I remember getting the catalog, and it was a picture from the White River, looking into town, and I said I want to be in that place, and I came here sight unseen. So Tom, you may remember that catalog cover. It was stunning Vermont in the summertime. And so my pivot here is, let's pivot from place to people. And I want to, and probably the most important people, some of the most important people in our lives when we were law students are our law professors. So I want to ask our panelists to share a memory about their favorite professor, and we need to be very crisp in our responses because we want to get into these breakout rooms. I'm going to just represent by just saying non-professors whose names I want to be out there. Abby Armstrong and Nina Thomas. two queens who shaped my experience, maybe, and many of yours, probably as much as, or if not more, as the titans, environmental and otherwise, who led us in some grueling Socratic method, but enliven my experience here. So I leave it. So I'm just going to throw it open to the panelists in any order. Share a memory about your favorite professor, please.
Favorite. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying, I got a good one on. Oh, go ahead, Ed. I'm sorry.
I like Rich, Nina Thomas, and Nancy White from the admissions office, which is where I did work study. They were not faculty, but they were very, very important to me in terms of my first year there at Vermont. And I think I may have been the first year student who was allowed to do work study as well as be a student there. And for those who don't know, I am the second person of color to graduate from Vermont Law School. And I think Shirley is number 3. But as for faculty, I'd have to say for me, it would be Stephanie Wilbanks that made a great impression on me. Because I remember taking her tax class, going in to get my final exam grade, and just knowing that I had failed or gotten, something below a C. And I was very excited to walk out with an A on my exam. So I'd say Stephanie Wilbanks had a great impact on me.
Yeah,
my
the example I was going to use was the kind of Bruce Dutu was our torts professor, and one of it shows a little bit of the growth of the school over the time since Sam was there. Bruce played on our summer softball team, my first summer there, along with a number of folks who were just from the local community that we had connected with at Crossroads and other places. So it was a kind of combined law school student, law school faculty, and local softball team that played in the local league, and we just had a great time. And Bruce was a real good, real important part of the team.
My favorite professor, and we had a lot of great professors. I will say this, that we had people like Grant Gilmore and Weinreb, and who came in because they wanted to stay in Vermont. They wanted to be in Vermont. And they were all wonderful professors. They were tenured at Harvard and Yale and other places, but they didn't teach there. They wrote there, but they taught at Vermont Law School. But my favorite professor has to be David Firestone. Not only because he was a wonderful teacher, I had him for contracts, I had him for environmental law, but he was down in the trenches with us right from the beginning. He fought as hard as we did for that law school, as far as that initial class is concerned. And I guess he's still teaching there, or from what I've been able to find out from various things about the law school. And he was a wonderful teacher, but more than that, he was a real mensch. He stood by us, and I appreciate that, and I'll never forget the contributions he made to our class and to the existence of the law school.
Yeah, I think Professor Firestone is reflective of everyone's experience here, whether you actually had him or not from the very beginning. I will say that Dean Shields had a great influence on me at my time. Our first year law school was Dean Shields' first year, and I got to work in his office my second and third year there. So I got to know him and Jeannie fairly well. He was a consummate professional, but he was just a good-hearted person. He never failed to sit down and talk to somebody or ask how someone was doing on a daily basis. But if I'm going to say someone other than Professor Firestone, I'm going to say that Cheryl Hanna pointed me in the right direction. She allowed me to be who I was at the time and to explore and to defy conventional wisdom at VLS. And she never failed to be kind and provide direction when I needed it.
I don't know. I'd have to say, from my perspective, as someone who came to Vermont Law School in '83 to study the relatively new field of environmental law, I ran into Pat Parenteau in the summer of '84. He had just left the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund, and he was on his way to being EPA Region 1 counsel in Boston, and he spent the summer at the law school, and he's pretty much still there. So having him in that class and getting a sense of who he was and what the field of environmental law could be. Again, this is the time where a lot of the main laws that we think of as old, circular record, they were just in their infancy, and it was an exciting time to be there. But it's still an exciting time to be there. I think that you're all benefiting from it, and just the fact that there are so many professors who have been there 20, 30, 40 years, I think that really says something about the school as a community.
If I could jump in, this is Joel. I was there interviewing Dick Brooks for his job. They had a group of students interviewing him in 1977, I believe, and then he came on board in 1978. And I think the program didn't really begin until 1979, September of '79. But I was his first assistant, I guess, student assistant, graduate assistant, whatever you call it. And he just basically guided me in some research that I was doing. And more than just simply being a teacher, he really became a good friend. We would go jogging every day. There was a group of us, several of us, who would go out and do that 5-mile loop when I could still run. And he was skinny and capable and a great guy. And like I said, he went from being merely a professor to being a really good friend.
Thank you, Joel. So I'm just going to call on our panelists to kind of wrap it up for us. So I'm going to call on Margot, and then I'm going to have Natasha, who's a year out, less than a year out from graduating. So to give, some real perspective of where things stand. So Margot, please.
I don't have a specific favorite person. I think it's just the relationship that's cultivated with the professors and the students is really something special. Everyone's kind of mentioned how kind they are and how cared for they are. And I was there, and the rest of the 2010s could talk about this for Hurricane Irene in 2011. And you've never seen a community pull together like it did during that hurricane. But there was a time when one of our favorite professors, their daughter lived in Boston, and there was some gnarly activities going on in Boston, and he gave us, I'm about his daughter's age, and he gave us the sweetest speech about how you should always feel safe, and if anybody had any concerns, they could come to him or anyone else on campus. I've seen the professors dress in drag for gala, which seems absurd. We were going to a Christmas party at Crossroads, and I'm in like a penguin sweater, and like there's a huge poinsettia in my hair, and I looked at a professor I spent a ton of time with, and I was like, why are you looking at me like that? Is it the poinsettia? And he just goes, do you have makeup on? And I just feel like these are not like standard relationships that you cultivate in other, maybe more formal or larger law schools. And I think it's so incredibly special. So Natasha.
It's gonna be hard. Yeah, I was gonna say it's gonna be hard to follow that up because I agree. It's really the relationships you're able to build with the professors. Like I've been able to build relationships with professors not only like on campus in person, but also offline. You know, in the online world. I was actually a TA for a class online, and so it really speaks to the school that professors have been so involved with the community and with even just like different groups on campus. Like I was a part of LALSA, a lot of professors would ask me, you know, if they could advertise for events or, you know, sort of pitch in depending on what the events was. Like it really just felt like they were there for the students, especially when things went awry, you know, whether it was snowstorm or tragedy, they were always there kind of like providing extension, being reasonable considering all the chaos that can be thrown at you. You know, you never know what life will throw at you. And so I really just appreciate that. And it ties again to kind of the slow pace of the school. Like, I definitely don't think it would be the same community at a bigger school in a city like that. I just don't think so. I think the fact that it is a small town and you are kind of isolated from the rest of the world, or that's kind of how it feels like sometimes, it really just allows you to really grow these relationships with the professors. So I could list like 6 different professors right now, but I know we're running on time. So, Rich, take it away.
Thank you, Natasha. And I want to, before we jump into our Zoom rooms, which are going to be organized by decade, and Brock, who I want to thank, who is our maestro behind the scenes for tech as well as just everything all alumni relations. He's our guy. He's literally our guy. So thank you, Brock. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank everybody who joined today. I want to wish everybody a happy founding day. And I want to say that any memories, we want to hear them, not just in Zoom calls, send them our way. Because I think if anything, the chills that I still am feeling, hearing names, hearing memories, this is a magical place. And we're fortunate to have it in our lives. And I want you to know that you're always welcome, of course. And so we hope we'll see you in Soro soon enough, or in the field. But we're glad that you're here and we're glad you're part of our community. So I'm going to close with that. And thank you all again. And now Brock's going to kind of send us out into our by decade rooms. So thank you all again.